Hi, this is my first video for YouTube, and I have to give credit to a guy who put a video up called Advice from an Old Man. Now, who would really be interested in that? But it did inspire me, saying that if he did it, I can do it. So this one's on racism and the Black Lives Matter movement. I am a white person, you can tell, I'm sure, but my ancestors were never involved in slavery or Jim Crow. So I can relate to the skepticism many of us have when told about racism in this country nowadays. We don't see ourselves as racist when we deal with black friends, co-workers, or neighbors. Hopefully we have some of those. But the fact is, we really don't know what it's like to be black in America because we're not black. So if we don't want to be ignorant, we have to listen to people who are black. And lo and behold, if they're willing to share with us, we find many of them, men especially, can relate stories of how they've been treated poorly, sometimes repeatedly, how they're followed around with suspicion in a store, how white folks cross the street as they approach, how they get stopped by police for trivial reasons over and over, how a cop says he smells marijuana and wants to search the car. This is not the type of racism that goes around stupidly preaching white superiority or is paternalistic like in the Old South. White supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the like are not very common and not what you would ever call systemic. In fact, the quote system says racial discrimination in housing or employment is illegal, and rightly so. Thank you, Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. No, the real racism that still exists, is common and pervasive, is fear and suspicion directed mainly at black male strangers. Because as I said, most white people get along fine with friends, co-workers, and neighbors of a different race. So how could we possibly be racist? Is it fair that unfamiliar black men get a reputation based on the bad behavior of some who simply share their skin color? No. Judging by appearance is the definition of prejudice. But let me digress for just a moment to tell about a group of people here in Ohio who live in communities and homes in Geauga counties called the Amish. You probably heard of them, how they uniformly dress in quaint old-fashioned clothes of black or blue, bearded men in black or straw hats with bowl haircuts, women in bonnets. They reject modern amenities such as the automobile or electricity in favor of the horse and buggy and self-reliance. The Amish are religiously observant and known for being gentle, non-violent pacifists. But let's turn our imaginations loose for a moment. Think of how it would be if the Amish had a reputation for high crime rates in their communities. What if there were drive-by buggy shootings by Amish gangsters, buggy jackings, and attempts to sell drugs or pimp women to tourists coming to buy quality cheese and tasty bakery goods? Maybe then the English, as they call us outsiders, would be just a bit suspicious if they saw some of these bull-headed young men congregated on a corner. Police might want to stop and frisk. Cops might fear facing an illegal weapon as they stop a buggy with a broken taillight. That sounds silly, doesn't it? That's because their reputation is just the opposite. Unfortunately, FBI stats have long shown that black men are responsible for much more crime than their share of the population. In fact, the violent felonies of homicide and robbery in particular, also for misdeeds such as carjacking and assault. In addition, majority black urban areas have gotten a reputation for high crime rates, drug dealing, and so on. Of course, there are various sociological explanations for it: poverty, their unique history of oppression, and so forth, but I don't have time to go into that right now. Other groups have experienced positive or negative prejudice. Gypsies in the early 20th century had distinctive characteristics of dress and complexion, and suffered suspicion and hostility due to a reputation for thievery and pickpocketing. This kind of prejudice is really hard to get rid of. That's because even the most woke people will try to give themselves and their families the best odds they can when it comes to being potential crime victims, especially a violent crime. no matter how they might want to give a stranger who looks different the benefit of the doubt. People prioritize self-preservation. Police are not immune from the notion that blacks are more likely to be criminally violent. They might approach a stopped vehicle with more fear and suspicion and a hand on their gun. Not good. You had one black guy in the Bronx and another in South Carolina who got shot for getting out a wallet. The South Carolina white cop went to prison for that one. Philando Castile was shot for supposedly going for a weapon that had already been disclosed to the police as a legal carry. Police departments must implement policies and training to prevent cops from basing suspicion on race alone. True, they do want to come home to their families in one piece, so self-preservation will come into play. But if blacks repeatedly can't get a fair shake from their police, then they should think about replacing the mayor and/or police chief in order to make fair treatment a reality. Police need to follow the policy and be held accountable when they don't. So now we come to Black Lives Matter and their supporters in the media and elsewhere, whose contention seems to be that white police are killing blacks all over the country because they think their lives don't matter. But friends, statistics simply don't bear that out. Of course Black Lives Matter. Who could disagree with that? But BLM advances a myth, a media narrative. It seems believable because every so-called example of it gets hyped in the media, and believable because it's an extrapolation of racism that really does exist, but which has morphed into a distortion and exaggeration. People who don't believe that narrative are said to not care about black lives and are vilified. It's important to know that in the Washington Post database of fatal shootings of unarmed people by police, it reported just 14 blacks, 9 of which really deserve further scrutiny, and 25 whites in all of 2019. That's in a whole year in a country of 330 million people. 48 police were killed as a result of felonious acts that same year, by the way. Yet with the media narrative advancing claims of Black Lives Matter, you'd think it happens all the time. Unarmed whites who get killed by police get hardly any media coverage because it doesn't fit the narrative. I remember back in the day when the media decided President Gerald Ford was clumsy, even though he was a star athlete in college. So whenever he had a misstep, it got hyped as a news story and mocked in Saturday Night Live skits. A media narrative is not a reliable indicator of the frequency or severity of that type of incident. Even the death of George Floyd, which set off all the protests, riots, and looting, was hyped because Floyd happened to be black and the cops mostly white. Watch the videos and try to find evidence of racism. Don't overlook body cam video that was leaked from the Minnesota prosecutor's office and shown by a British newspaper, the Daily Mail. Mr. Floyd was saying, please don't shoot me, and I can't breathe, before the cops did anything to him. The coroner's report stated that Floyd had, in addition to methamphetamine, an overdose of fentanyl in his body, which can swell the lungs and make breathing difficult. Do the facts matter to Black Lives Matter? Facts will matter when it goes to court, and the outcome may cause even more anger due to people's expectations. I feel badly for any victim of police brutality or excess, whatever the race or ethnicity, and justice needs to be served. Laws may need to be changed, for example, to get rid of no-knock warrants, the type that supposedly took the life of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, and apparently that has actually been disputed. But the Black Lives Matter movement is counterproductive to its slogan. Here's why. The BLM tenet of belief was expressed in the words of former First Lady Michelle Obama, who has apparently bought into it. At the 2020 Democratic National Convention, she said, quote, "As George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and a never-ending list of innocent people of color continue to be murdered, stating the simple fact that a black life matters is met with derision in the nation's highest office," unquote. So if black men believe, like Michelle Obama, that police are out to murder them and they might die at their next traffic stop, how do you think they'll act when they encounter police? Writer Jason Whitlock, who just happens to be black, said, "If you engage with the police filled with fear, you're more likely to make bad decisions that then provoke them to take action." Even my own lily-white mother, bless her heart, warned me as a youth to never run from the police or resist them, because that's not healthy to do, no matter what race you are. Nervous police plus flight or fight by the suspect is a really bad combination. Cooperation is wise. You can file a complaint later. If you think about the notorious cases highlighted by the media, most involve trying to get away from police or resist them or fail to obey their orders. Counterproductivity is also demonstrated by the effect of the behavior that has accompanied BLM protests. Videos show rioting, arson, looting, beating people up, disturbing the peace late at night, confronting and intimidating people based on race, and cursing and flipping off random white people who actually might be sympathetic to their cause. Let me ask a real easy question here. Does that kind of violent, unlawful, or uncouth behavior reduce the kind of real racial prejudice we've been talking about here, or reinforce it? Think about it. And accusing all white people in general while doing all that invites a backlash, which I'd really hate to see. That's not a threat. I'm just talking about human nature. And I can remind everyone that President Trump was elected partly because people didn't like identity politics. Granted, many white troublemakers have been mixed in there, taking advantage of the occasion to commit criminal acts according to their own extreme agendas. But plenty of blacks are seen on video destroying and looting businesses that had provided jobs in their own neighborhoods. So does that make business people want to open or maintain businesses in that area? I don't think so. This means fewer jobs, more poverty, more crime, worse reputation, and more racism. Finally, many have pointed out the obvious effect when police are defunded or don't have the support of local politicians or prosecutors. They back off of their policing and become more protective of themselves. After all, why put forth the effort just to get into a position of being fired or worse? Not surprisingly, criminals and gangsters fill that vacuum, the crime rate rises, and many more black lives are lost. So that's it. I'd be interested in your comments, because everyone has blind spots. So if you feel like commenting, have at it.